Despite being built roughly 30,000 years before the era of Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious by the Rakata, whose influence on the galaxy was all but a memory by that time, the Starforge would have a significant influence on the Sith of the Rule of Two era, and how they would ultimately bring about their grand plan. Although both the Starforge and the Rakata would be brought back onto the galactic stage through the efforts of Darth Revan and Darth Malak and the devastation of the Jedi Civil War, we know from the novel Darth Bane Path of Destruction that while the story of Revan and Malak would live on during the millennia that followed the Battle of the Starforge, the secrets of the Rakata, the Starforge, and the world of Rakata Prime did not, intentionally hidden by the Jedi. Under these circumstances, it's incredible that the Sith Order would be able to obtain any information about the Starforge at all, let alone enough to be used as an important teaching device by Darth Plagueis. But while the story of how this knowledge would end up in the hands of Plagueis and Palpatine through the efforts of Darth Bane is interesting in its own respects, the different interpretations of Bane and Plagueis regarding the Starforge and Rakata is even more interesting in my opinion. Benefiting from his lineage within Darth Bane's Sith Order, Darth Plagueis would come to own one of the largest and most impressive libraries in the entire galaxy, filled with a collection of treaties, commentaries, and writings that were often gained by the Sith through agents that were unaware of who they were working for. Obtained in the years before he would even take Palpatine as his apprentice, one of the works in Plagueis' library was one devoted to the ancient history of the Rakata. But while works like these would certainly provide insights into the Rakata and Starforge for Plagueis, which would then be passed down to Sidious, it was likely through the teachings of Darth Bane where Plagueis' true understanding was gained. Like Plagueis, Bane would be introduced to the Starforge and the Rakata through a written work found while he was a student at the Sith Academy on Korriban. But the ancient book Bane would stumble upon within the Academy's archives carried significant authority, entitled The Rakata of the Unknown World, which was written by Darth Revan himself. In pursuing his path that would ultimately lead him to the Unknown World to locate Darth Revan's holocron and formulate his Rule of Two, Bane would learn a significant amount of information regarding the mysteries of both the Starforge and the Rakata, traveling to the world of their origins just as Revan did 3,000 years earlier. Plagueis and Sidious, like the other Sith within the Rule of Two era, likely benefited from Bane's teachings and knowledge, with topics like the Starforge and Rakata being revealed despite the Jedi and Republic's best efforts to hide them. Unsurprisingly, just as the Rakata and Starforge helped to shape Darth Bane's path with the dark side, particularly Darth Revan's interaction with them, they also had a profound influence on Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious, causing the former to base his philosophy for immortality and for achieving the Sith Grand Plan upon the greatness achieved by the Rakata's infinite empire. Roughly 10 years into Darth Sidious' apprenticeship, still over 3 decades from the Clone War, Plagueis would explain the grand plan of the Sith that would be undertaken by both of them. He began his lesson by explaining that they were united with the dark side of the Force, distancing themselves from the Jedi who served the light side. But going further, Plagueis would explain that the dark side had always preceded the light, a fact that was known by the ancients, such as the Rakata and even the Celestials, who lived more than 30,000 years before them. Plagueis would find importance in the example of the Rakata and their Starforge. He told Sidious that the massive shipyard that worked to create the most powerful army the galaxy had ever seen was an example of the Rakata, who were among the first to utilize the dark side to make the Force subservient to the will of sentient life. That is, the original idea that preceded even the Sith was to capture the power of the Force so that it would serve living beings, rather than living beings serving the Force. Plagueis saw the Rakata and their Starforge as proof of this. In attempting to get the dark side to serve them, the Rakata did not hold themselves back, nor did they pronounce judgment on their works. They created a dark side device like the Starforge as a means in which they did what was necessary to gain dominance over the Force itself. In contrast, Plagueis believed that this was the opposite of what the Jedi attempted to do, as their order merely sought balance in the Force and lost sight of the fact that all beings, even those who were Force-sensitive, were meant to evolve past their blind obedience to the Force's will. With the example of the Rakata and the Starforge, Plagueis and his apprentice Sidious would look to recreate the actions that define these original users of the dark side. Plagueis would also look to capture the power of the Force and make it serve him by waging war against the Force itself. Just as those who lived millennia before him moved planets, organized entire star systems, and crafted dark-side devices like the Starforge, Plagueis would also work to make the Force subservient to him. His quest for immortality was certainly part of this goal for Plagueis. But even more important would be the actions of Plagueis and Sidious roughly a decade before the events of the Phantom Menace. Just as Plagueis promised he would follow the example of the Rakata to make the Force serve him 20 years earlier, Plagueis and Sidious would challenge the Force for sovereignty, bringing their will to bear on the Force through months of intense meditation. Initially, they would succeed, asserting their sovereignty over the Force to clearly tip the galaxy towards the dark side. However, Plagueis would then step too far, attempting without Sidious to create a being powerful in the Force himself, where he not only failed, but he felt the Force grow silent and retreat from him. While Plagueis would accept his victory that he was able to extinguish the light, succeeding in making the Force serve him in this way, he wasn't naive enough not to fear retaliation from the Force and a counterattack against his onslaught. Interestingly, if Plagueis was correct in his interpretation that, like him, the Starforge did represent an attempt by the Rakata to have the Force and dark side serve them, it appears that both the Rakata and the Sith would ultimately be targeted by the Force itself, with the Rakata inexplicably losing their connection to the Force, and the Sith being undone by a chosen one who would eventually destroy them. The interpretation of the Rakata and Starforge acknowledged by Plagueis and Sidious stood in stark contrast to that of Darth Bane. When traveling to the ancient homeworld of the Rakata, Bane would take the exact opposite view of Plagueis. Rather than seeing them as attempts to make the Force subservient to them, Bane saw the Starforge as a monument that was dedicated to the power of the dark side, and the Rakata as the first servants of the dark side. Bane would use these examples and the teachings of Darth Revan to fashion his rule of two as a way to embody the strength and power of the dark side and to amass an understanding of it that would destroy the Republic and Jedi, not wage war against it to become just as grand as the Force itself. This difference in how Plagueis, Sidious, and Bane viewed the Rakata and Starforge may have ultimately been a significant factor in the undoing of the Sith and their efforts in the Rule of Two era. So there we have it, how the Rakata and Starforge influenced the Sith within the Rule of Two era. Thank you very much to all of the Patreon members of Star Wars Reading Club, as your support is so greatly appreciated. You can find all of our social media links and a link to our Star Wars gaming channel in the description below, for updates and even more Star Wars content. We love making these videos, so why not subscribe for more fun Star Wars theories and discussions. Also, if you enjoyed the video, think about giving a like or leaving a comment. If not for me... For the Battle of the Starforge.